Imagine this. You wake up one morning, scroll through your phone, and within minutes, you've consumed more information than a medieval scholar encountered in their entire lifetime. You've seen faces, voices, opinions, thousands of fragmented pieces of humanity compressed into glowing pixels. You feel connected, yet somehow, you've never been more alone. You feel informed, yet you can't shake the sense that you know nothing at all. You put down the phone, look around your room, and ask yourself a question that chills you to the bone. Am I even real anymore? This is not science fiction. This is your life. This is our collective reality. We live in an age where we have built towers that scrape the sky, yet we cannot escape the suffocating emptiness within our own minds. We have conquered diseases, mapped the human genome, and sent machines to Mars, but we cannot cure the epidemic of meaninglessness that spreads through our cities like an invisible plague. We call this progress. We call this civilization. But what if we're wrong? What if beneath the surface of our technological marvels and material abundance, something far more sinister is unfolding, a rot so deep, so pervasive, that we can no longer see it because we are it? Today we will journey into the depths of this mental apocalypse, the age of filth that Jung warned us about, and uncover why his insights are more relevant now than ever. Stay until the very end, because the last revelation we will uncover is not only the most important, but it might transform the way you see yourself, society, and the future of human consciousness. Before we begin, I invite you to take part in this exploration with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like to support the work, and share your reflections in the comments. Each interaction helps expand this community of seekers who are not satisfied with shallow answers, but who desire depth, wisdom, and transformation. And I promise you, what you are about to hear may radically change how you interpret the age we live in and how you navigate it. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to map the darkest territories of the human soul, saw this coming nearly a century ago. He didn't just predict a crisis of economics or politics. He foresaw something far more catastrophic. A mental apocalypse. A collapse not of buildings, but of meaning itself. A world where humanity would drown not in water, but in its own psychological waste. A collective descent into what can only be described as an age of filth. But here's the paradox that should haunt you. We've never had more access to knowledge, yet we've never been more confused. We've never had more freedom, yet we've never felt more trapped. We've never had more ways to connect, yet loneliness has become the defining condition of modern existence. How is this possible? How can a species that has achieved so much externally be collapsing so completely internally? Jung understood something that we've forgotten. The greatest threats to humanity don't come from outside. They come from within. The real apocalypse isn't nuclear war or climate catastrophe. It's the silent disintegration of the human psyche itself. It's the moment when we lose contact with the depths of our own being, when we become strangers to ourselves, when we mistake the noise of existence for the substance of life. Look around you. Really look, not at the surface, but beneath it. What do you see? You see people performing their lives rather than living them. You see identities constructed from likes and shares, relationships reduced to transactions, conversations replaced by monologues shouted into the void. You see a culture that worships youth but has no wisdom, that celebrates individuality but produces only conformity, that promises happiness but delivers only distraction. You see art that shocks but doesn't transform, politics that divides but doesn't unite, spirituality that soothes but doesn't awaken. This is the age of filth Jung warned about. Not filth in the simple sense of physical dirt, but filth as a metaphor for corruption, the corruption of truth, the corruption of values, the corruption of the soul itself. It's when everything sacred is profaned, when everything profound is trivialized, when everything meaningful is commodified and sold back to us as entertainment. It's when we mistake the map for the territory, the symbol for the reality, the appearance for the essence. And here's what terrifies Jung's vision into relevance. We don't even recognize it anymore. We've normalized the abnormal. We've accepted the unacceptable. We've become so numb to the decay that we can no longer smell the rot. Like fish who don't know they're swimming in water, we don't know we're drowning in meaninglessness because we've never known anything else. But what if this recognition, this terrible, uncomfortable awakening to the reality of our condition, is exactly what we need? What if the very fact that you feel something is wrong, that you sense the emptiness behind the facade, that you're reading these words and feeling a knot of recognition in your chest, is proof that not all is lost? What if the mental apocalypse Jung predicted is not a death sentence, but an invitation? Jung believed that every crisis of consciousness carries within it the seeds of transformation, that every descent into darkness is also a potential journey toward light, that every apocalypse, which literally means unveiling or revelation, is an opportunity to see what was always hidden. But here's the catch. This transformation isn't automatic. It requires something from you. It requires you to stop, to look inward, to confront what you've been running from your entire life. So ask yourself, are you ready to see what Jung saw? Are you ready to understand why this age of filth isn't just happening to you, but through you? Are you ready to discover that the solution to this mental apocalypse doesn't lie in changing the world outside, but in confronting the world within? Because once you understand what Jung understood, you can never return to ignorance. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize your role in the collective madness, you become responsible for either perpetuating it or transcending it. The question isn't whether the mental apocalypse is real. The question is, what will you do about it? You believe you are in control of your life. You believe that the thoughts running through your mind are yours, that the desires you feel are authentic, that the values you hold are chosen freely. But what if this is the greatest illusion of all? What if the very foundation of your identity, everything you think makes you you, is nothing more than a carefully constructed mask, a performance scripted by forces you've never consciously acknowledged? Jung called this the shadow. It's not some abstract philosophical concept meant for academic debate. The shadow is the repository of everything you've rejected about yourself, the rage you've swallowed, the envy you've denied, the greed you've rationalized away, the fears you've buried so deep you've forgotten they exist. It's every impulse society taught you was unacceptable, every desire your parents shamed you for having, every aspect of your humanity that didn't fit the image of who you were supposed to be. And here's the terrifying truth. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger. It waits in the darkness of your unconscious, accumulating power, until one day it erupts in your relationships, in your choices, in the collective madness of society itself. Think about this carefully. Every war, every genocide, every moral collapse throughout history didn't happen because humanity suddenly became evil. It happened because the shadow was denied for so long that it exploded with catastrophic force. Jung witnessed this firsthand. He watched the rise of Nazi Germany, a supposedly civilized, educated society that descended into barbarism within years. How? Because millions of individuals refused to acknowledge their own capacity for darkness, and so they projected it outward, onto scapegoats, onto enemies, onto anyone who could carry the burden of their unexamined hatred. This is the hidden mechanism driving the age of filth. We live in a culture obsessed with appearing virtuous, enlightened, successful, yet beneath this polished surface, the shadow festers. Social media has become a theater of masks where everyone performs a curated version of themselves, carefully editing out anything that might reveal weakness, doubt, or imperfection. We present ourselves as righteous crusaders for various causes, yet we harbor the same tribalism, cruelty, and self-righteousness we claim to oppose. We condemn others for their flaws while remaining blind to our own. This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It's the shadow operating through us, using our very attempts at goodness as a disguise for its darkness. Jung understood that the psyche cannot be divided cleanly into good and evil, light and dark. We are not angels occasionally troubled by temptation. We are whole beings containing multitudes capable of extraordinary love and unspeakable cruelty, profound wisdom and willful ignorance, selfless sacrifice and ruthless selfishness. The problem arises when we identify only with the light and repress the dark. When we do this individually, we become neurotic, anxious, and prone to self-sabotage. When we do this collectively, we create the conditions for societal breakdown. Consider how this plays out in modern life. We are taught from childhood to suppress our authentic responses in favor of socially acceptable ones. We learn to smile when we're angry, to say we're fine when we're breaking, to project confidence when we're terrified. Layer upon layer, we build a persona, a mask we show the world, while the shadow accumulates everything we've rejected. And because we're disconnected from our own darkness, We cannot recognize it when it manifests externally. We wonder why depression and anxiety are at epidemic levels. We wonder why people seem more divided, more hostile, more unable to engage in genuine dialogue. We wonder why, despite all our material progress, we feel so empty inside. The answer Jung would give is simple yet devastating. We have lost contact with the totality of ourselves. We have become fragmented, living only from the ego, that narrow, defensive part of the psyche that believes it's in control. The ego seeks security, validation, and the maintenance of its carefully constructed self-image. It cannot tolerate ambiguity, cannot embrace paradox, cannot face the reality that we are far more complex and contradictory than we pretend to be. And so the ego builds walls, creates categories of good and bad, us and them, acceptable and unacceptable. It wages an endless war against the shadow, never realizing that this war is unwinnable because the shadow is not separate from us. It is us. Jung warned that this internal war has external consequences. When individuals are cut off from their own depths, they become susceptible to manipulation by collective forces. They adopt ideologies without questioning them, follow leaders who promise simple solutions to complex problems, and participate in movements that offer the intoxicating feeling of righteousness without the hard work of self-examination. This is how ordinary people commit extraordinary atrocities. This is how civilized societies descend into madness, not because humans are inherently evil, but because they refuse to acknowledge the capacity for evil within themselves. The Age of Filth is ultimately the age of denial. We deny our shadow, so it erupts as addiction, violence, and moral hypocrisy. We deny our need for meaning, so we fill the void with consumption and distraction. We deny our mortality, so we live superficially, afraid to engage with the depth and gravitas of existence. And perhaps most tragically, we deny our interconnectedness, the reality that the world we see outside is a reflection of the world we carry inside. When Jung said that the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man, he meant this literally. The state of our collective consciousness determines the state of our world. Fix the inner, and the outer follows. Ignore the inner, and the outer collapses. This is the hidden problem at the root of the mental apocalypse. We have become strangers to ourselves, and in doing so, we have become strangers to reality itself. You think you're making free choices, but are you? Every morning you wake up and reach for your phone before your feet touch the ground. You scroll through an endless feed of curated lives, comparing yourself to people you've never met, feeling inadequate in ways you can't quite articulate. You go to work, perform tasks that feel meaningless, return home exhausted yet unable to rest. You fill your evenings with streaming services, social media, anything to avoid the silence. And in that silence, there's a question you refuse to ask. What am I running from? This is the unseen consequence of the mental apocalypse, the ways in which our disconnection from the self manifests not as dramatic collapse, but as quiet desperation. Jung understood that when we lose contact with the depths of our being, we don't simply feel sad or anxious. We become hollow. We experience what he called loss of soul, a condition where life continues mechanically. But the animating force, the spark that makes existence meaningful, has vanished. You go through the motions. You achieve the milestones society tells you to achieve. But beneath it all, there's a gnawing emptiness that no amount of success, pleasure, or distraction can fill. The modern world has perfected the art of keeping us distracted from this emptiness. We are bombarded with stimuli every waking moment, notifications, advertisements, news cycles designed to trigger outrage or fear, entertainment engineered to capture our attention without satisfying our deeper needs. This is not accidental. A population disconnected from itself is a population that can be controlled, manipulated, sold to. When you don't know who you are, when you've lost contact with your inner authority, you become dependent on external validation. You need others to tell you what to think, what to want, what to value. You become what Jung feared most, the mass individual, indistinguishable from the crowd, living not from authentic self-awareness, but from imposed narratives. Consider the psychological mechanism at play here. The brain's reward system, designed to help us survive by reinforcing beneficial behaviors, has been hijacked. Every like, every share, every notification triggers a small dopamine release, just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to satisfy. You're caught in a loop of craving and temporary relief, while the deeper hunger, the soul's need for meaning, connection, and purpose goes unfed. This is addiction in its purest form, and it operates beneath conscious awareness. You don't realize you're trapped because the trap has become your entire reality. But the consequences extend far beyond individual psychology. When millions of people are simultaneously disconnected from their depths, society itself begins to fragment. Jung observed that shared myths, rituals, and symbols once provided a common ground, a collective framework that gave life meaning and connected individuals to something larger than themselves. In the Age of Filth, these unifying structures have collapsed. We no longer have shared stories that anchor us to truth, beauty, or transcendence. Instead, we have competing narratives, each claiming absolute validity, each demanding total allegiance. The result is not diversity of perspective, but tribal warfare, a fractured landscape where everyone retreats into their own echo chamber, convinced of their righteousness and the evil of those who disagree. This fragmentation creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance on a massive scale. You're told you live in the freest, most advanced society in history, yet you feel trapped and powerless. You're told you're connected to the world through technology, yet loneliness is epidemic. You're told to be yourself, yet conformity has never been more oppressive. These contradictions create a psychological tension that must be resolved somehow. And in the absence of genuine self-awareness, people resolve it through projection. They externalize their inner chaos, blaming the world, blaming others, blaming systems and structures for the emptiness they feel inside. This is the shadow at work collectively, the unconscious darkness of millions being projected outward, creating the very chaos and division we claim to oppose. Jung warned that this process, if left unchecked, leads to what he called psychic epidemics, mass delusions, where entire populations lose touch with reality. We've seen this throughout history. Witch hunts, totalitarian movements, moral panics. But in the Age of Filth, these epidemics don't look like dramatic historical events. They look like everyday life. They look like the algorithmic radicalization of ordinary people, the normalization of cruelty disguised as justice, the celebration of victimhood as identity, the reduction of complex human beings to simplistic labels. They look like a world where nuance has died, where everything is either absolutely good or absolutely evil, where the capacity for genuine dialogue has been replaced by performative outrage. And here's what makes this so insidious. You can participate in this madness while believing you're on the side of sanity. You can contribute to the Age of Filth while thinking you're fighting against it. Because the shadow doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "Hello, I'm your repressed darkness, and I'm about to make you do something destructive." Instead, it disguises itself as righteousness, as justice, as the defense of truth. It gives you enemies to hate, causes to champion, and the intoxicating feeling that you are among the enlightened few who truly understand what's happening. This is the most dangerous consequence of all the shadow's ability to make you feel virtuous while acting out your unconscious darkness. The neurological reality supports Jung's insights. Research shows that when we're in a state of heightened emotional arousal, fear, anger, tribal identification, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking and self-reflection, essentially goes offline. We revert to primitive survival modes, fight, flight, or freeze. In this state, we cannot process complexity, cannot hold paradox, cannot recognize our own biases. We become reactive rather than reflective, defensive rather than curious. And in a culture that profits from keeping us in this state because outraged, fearful people click more, buy more, engage more, we're being systematically prevented from accessing the very faculties we need to break free. This is the trap Jung saw closing around humanity. A world designed to keep us disconnected from ourselves, feeding us just enough stimulation to prevent us from noticing the emptiness, just enough outrage to prevent us from looking inward, just enough distraction to prevent us from asking the questions that might actually set us free. And the consequence is not just individual suffering, but collective disintegration, the slow death of meaning, the erosion of truth, the replacement of genuine human connection with performative interaction. But here's where Jung's vision becomes crucial. He didn't just diagnose the problem. He understood that recognizing these unseen consequences is itself the first step toward liberation. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand how the trap operates, you can no longer participate in it unconsciously. The very awareness of your disconnection begins to reconnect you. The recognition of your shadow begins to integrate it. The acknowledgement of your complicity in the age of filth becomes the foundation for transcending it. You've been living someone else's life. Not entirely, perhaps, but enough that if you were truly honest with yourself, brutally, uncomfortably honest, you'd have to admit that most of your choices, your beliefs, your very sense of identity has been shaped by forces outside your conscious awareness. Your parents' expectations, society's scripts, the algorithm's predictions of what you'll click next. The question is not whether you've been conditioned. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Jung's answer was radical, and it remains radical today. You must undergo what he called individuation. This is not self-improvement, in the shallow sense, not another productivity hack or confidence boost. Individuation is the deliberate, courageous process of becoming whole. It means confronting everything you've repressed, integrating everything you've denied, and claiming responsibility for the totality of who you are. It means breaking free from the collective hypnosis and daring to live from your own center, even when that center contradicts everything you've been taught to believe. But let's be clear about what this requires. Jung compared individuation to a kind of death and rebirth. The ego, that fragile defensive structure you've identified as yourself, must surrender its illusion of control. It must face the shadow it has spent a lifetime fleeing. This is not comfortable. This is not easy. In fact, it's terrifying. Because when you truly confront your shadow, when you look honestly at your capacity for selfishness, cruelty, cowardice, and self-deception, you can no longer maintain the comforting fiction that you're one of the good ones. You realize you contain the same darkness as everyone you've ever judged. And paradoxically, this realization is the beginning of genuine freedom. Here's the counterintuitive truth Jung discovered. You cannot transcend what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot integrate what you keep in darkness. The shadow doesn't become less powerful when you ignore it. It becomes more powerful, operating through you in unconscious, destructive ways. But when you turn toward it, when you name it, when you accept that yes, this darkness is also me, something extraordinary happens. The energy that was trapped in repression becomes available for transformation. The aspects of yourself you rejected begin to reveal their hidden gifts. The very qualities you were most ashamed of contain the seeds of your greatest strengths. This is not moral relativism. Jung wasn't saying that all behaviors are equally valid or that we should act on every dark impulse. He was saying something far more sophisticated, that consciousness itself is the transformative force. When you bring the shadow into awareness, you gain the power to choose how its energy expresses itself. The aggression you've repressed can become assertiveness, the ability to set boundaries and defend what matters. The envy you've denied can become admiration, the recognition of qualities you want to develop in yourself. The fear you've hidden can become discernment, the wisdom to recognize genuine danger. But individuation requires more than shadow work. It requires reconnecting with what Jung called the self, that center of the psyche that transcends the ego, that connects you to something deeper and more enduring than your personal story. The self speaks through dreams, through synchronicities, through moments of profound insight that seem to come from beyond your conscious mind. Throughout history, those who broke free from collective hypnosis shared certain characteristics. They were willing to be misunderstood. They were willing to stand alone. They prioritized inner integrity over external approval. Think of Socrates, who chose death rather than compromise his philosophical inquiry. Think of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in a concentration camp by recognizing that even in the most horrific circumstances, we retain the freedom to choose our response. Think of the mystics, artists, and visionaries who, throughout every age, have dared to see beyond the accepted narrative, to speak uncomfortable truths, to live from a depth that made others uncomfortable. These individuals weren't superhuman. They were simply willing to do what most people refuse, to face themselves completely. They recognized that the greatest rebellion is not against external authority, but against the internal tyrant, the ego's desperate need for security, validation, and control. They understood that true freedom begins when you stop trying to be who you think you should be and start discovering who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. So, how do you begin this rebellion? First, you must create space for silence. In a world designed to keep you distracted, silence is revolutionary. Turn off the notifications, step away from the feed. Sit with yourself without distraction and notice what arises. At first, it will be uncomfortable anxiety, restlessness, the compulsive urge to reach for stimulation. This discomfort is not a problem to solve, it's information. It's showing you how dependent you've become on external input, how afraid you are of your own inner world. Second, you must question everything you believe. Not in a cynical, nihilistic way, but with genuine curiosity. Ask yourself, is this belief truly mine, or did I absorb it unconsciously? Does this value actually resonate with my deepest truth? Or am I following it because I fear the consequences of not following it? This requires courage, because you may discover that much of what you thought defined you is actually borrowed, secondhand, inherited without examination. Third, you must engage with your dreams and your symbolic life. Jung insisted that the unconscious communicates through images, not concepts. Your dreams are not random neural firing, they're messages from the depths of your psyche, offering guidance, warning, and insight. Learn their language. Pay attention to recurring symbols, to the emotions they evoke, to the patterns that emerge over time. This is not superstition. This is reclaiming a mode of knowing that modernity has dismissed, but that remains essential to psychological wholeness. Fourth, you must take responsibility for your projections. Every time you have a strong emotional reaction to someone else, whether attraction or repulsion, ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in them? What aspect of my shadow am I projecting onto this person? This doesn't mean your perceptions are always wrong. It means that your perceptions reveal as much about your inner world as they do about external reality. By withdrawing your projections, by recognizing what belongs to you rather than to others, you reclaim your power and see more clearly. Finally, you must accept that individuation is a lifelong process. There is no finish line, no moment when you've finally arrived at complete wholeness. There are only deeper layers of self-knowledge, more subtle forms of self-deception to recognize, new challenges that call you to grow in ways you couldn't have anticipated. This is not discouraging, it's liberating. It means you're never trapped in a fixed identity. You're always becoming, always evolving, always capable of transformation. The rebellion Jung calls for is not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, internal, relentless. It's the daily choice to turn inward rather than project outward, to take responsibility rather than blame others, to seek truth rather than comfort. And it's contagious. Every individual who undertakes this work contributes to the healing of the collective. Because the world is not separate from us, it's the manifestation of our shared consciousness. Change yourself, and you change the frequency you broadcast into the world. Here is the revelation that changes everything. The insight Jung considered both the most liberating and the most dangerous. You are not who you think you are. The person you've been defending, promoting, and trying to perfect your entire life, the ego, with all its accomplishments and failures, its pride and shame, its carefully constructed story of me, is not your true self. It's a fragment, a surface, a mask worn so long you've forgotten there's a face beneath it. Jung called the deeper reality the self, and this is not simply a larger ego or a better version of who you already are. The self is the totality of the psyche, the union of conscious and unconscious, the archetype of wholeness that encompasses everything you are and everything you could be. It is simultaneously the most intimate center of your being and something that transcends your personal existence entirely. Jung often compared it to the relationship between the sun and the solar system. The self is the organizing principle around which the entire psyche revolves, the source of meaning, direction, and life itself. But here's what makes this revelation so transformative and so terrifying. The ego cannot control the self. In fact, the ego's entire orientation must reverse. Instead of the ego trying to master life, trying to impose its will on reality, trying to maintain its fragile sense of control, it must learn to serve something greater than itself. This is what Jung meant by the death and rebirth at the heart of individuation. The ego doesn't disappear, it finds its rightful place. It stops pretending to be the king and becomes the servant of a deeper intelligence, a wisdom that moves through you when you stop trying to force your way through life. Think about what this means for the mental apocalypse we're living through. The Age of Filth is fundamentally a crisis of ego inflation, a world where billions of fragmented egos compete for validation, security, and dominance, each convinced that its limited perspective is the whole truth. We have become a civilization of egos without selves, of personalities without depth, of identities without essence. And this is why we feel so empty, so anxious, so perpetually dissatisfied. Because the ego, no matter how successful it becomes, cannot bear the weight of existence. It collapses under the pressure of mortality, meaninglessness, and the vastness of reality it cannot control. The self, by contrast, is not threatened by these things. It knows that you are more than your achievements, more than your failures, more than your story. It knows that beneath the surface drama of your life, there is something eternal, something that cannot be destroyed by circumstances or diminished by time. Jung didn't mean this in a naive, New Age sense. He wasn't promising that everything would be okay or that you'd live forever. He meant something far more profound, that when you connect with the self, you discover a ground of being that doesn't depend on external conditions. You find an inner stability that remains constant even as everything around you changes. This is the secret that mystics throughout history have tried to communicate, that depth psychologists have attempted to map, that every genuine spiritual tradition points toward. You contain infinities. The consciousness that looks out through your eyes is not produced by your brain. It's the same consciousness that animates all existence, expressing itself uniquely through the particular configuration of your life. You are simultaneously the wave and the ocean, the individual note and the eternal music, the temporary form and the indestructible essence. But, and this is crucial, this realization demands everything from you. Jung warned that encountering the self is the most terrifying experience a human being can have, because it shatters every illusion the ego has constructed. It reveals that your carefully curated self-image is a fiction. It shows you that your control over your life is far more limited than you believed. It confronts you with the reality that you've been living on the surface of your own existence, skating over depths you've been too afraid to explore. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You become responsible. You can no longer blame your parents, your circumstances, your past. You recognize that how you respond to life, the meaning you make, the attitude you take, the consciousness you bring, is your choice and your responsibility alone. This is why Jung said that the encounter with the self is like a crucifixion. The ego's false sovereignty must die. Its pretensions must be surrendered. Its defenses must be laid down. And this feels like annihilation. But on the other side of this death is something the ego could never have imagined. A life lived from the center rather than the periphery, from depth rather than surface, from truth rather than performance. You stop trying to be someone and start becoming yourself. You stop chasing external validation and start listening to internal authority. You stop fearing death because you've discovered something within that death cannot touch. Now, apply this to the collective level. What would happen if even a small percentage of humanity underwent this transformation? What if, instead of billions of fragmented egos projecting their shadows onto each other, we had millions of individuals living from the self, taking responsibility for their inner worlds, refusing to participate in collective hysteria? Jung believed this was not just possible, but necessary for human survival. He saw that the apocalypse, the unveiling, was forcing this choice upon us. Either we wake up to the deeper dimensions of our being, or we destroy ourselves through our unconsciousness. The mental apocalypse, then, is not punishment. It's not evidence that humanity is doomed. It's a crisis designed to force evolution. The Age of Filth is the alchemical fire that burns away everything false, everything superficial, everything that cannot withstand the heat of truth. And what remains, what emerges from the flames, is the self purified, clarified, made conscious. This is the phoenix Jung spoke of, the symbol of death and rebirth, the promise that destruction and creation are inseparable. But this transformation will not happen automatically. It will not be delivered by technology, by political systems, by collective movements. It can only happen one individual at a time through the courageous choice to turn inward, to face the shadow, to descend into the depths of the unconscious and retrieve the gold hidden there. Jung called this the hero's journey, and every single person is called to undertake it, not by slaying external dragons, but by confronting internal demons, not by conquering the world, but by integrating the self. Here is the final truth, the one that will haunt you if you let it penetrate. You are the answer to the mental apocalypse, not humanity in general, not society as an abstraction. The degree to which you are willing to face your own darkness determines how much light you can bring into the world. The degree to which you are willing to question your own certainties determines how much wisdom you can embody. The degree to which you are willing to surrender your ego's control determines how much the self can work through you. This is not a comfortable teaching. It places the burden of transformation squarely on your shoulders. But it's also the most empowering teaching possible, because it means you are not helpless. You are not a victim of circumstances, of history, of the age of filth. You are a potential agent of renewal. Every moment of genuine self-awareness, every act of conscious integration, every choice to respond rather than react, ripples outward in ways you cannot measure, but that nonetheless change the fabric of reality. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." This is the ultimate invitation of the mental apocalypse, to stop dreaming the collective nightmare and to wake up to who and what you really are. This is the path through the apocalypse, not around it, not away from it, but through its very center, into the fire that burns away illusion and reveals what has always been true. You are not separate from the world. You are not separate from others. You are not even separate from the darkness you fear. You are all of it, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, individual and universal, mortal and eternal. And when you finally accept this, when you stop fighting reality and start embracing it completely, something miraculous happens. The mental apocalypse transforms from a nightmare into a revelation. The age of filth becomes the soil from which new life grows. And you discover that what you were searching for outside yourself, meaning purpose, connection, wholeness, has been waiting inside you all along, buried beneath layers of conditioning, waiting for you to have the courage to dig deep enough to find it. Jung saw this coming. He warned us. He showed us the map. But he also knew that maps are useless if no one has the courage to take the journey. The question that remains, the question that will define not just your life, but the future of human consciousness itself, is devastatingly simple. Will you? Will you turn inward when everything tells you to look outside? Will you face your shadow when it's easier to project it onto others? Will you surrender your ego's control when your entire identity depends on maintaining it? Will you dare to become whole when fragmentation is the norm? The mental apocalypse is here. The age of filth surrounds us. But so does the possibility of transcendence. Jung's final gift to us was this understanding, that every ending contains a beginning, every death a rebirth, every apocalypse a revelation. The choice of which one you experience belongs to no one but you. The world will not save you, but you might save yourself. And in doing so, you might just save the world.